I would like to say thank you so much for the support from Claremont Graduate University and the Kingsley Tufts Prize. Before many of the other awards and recognitions that Chronic received, Kingsley Tufts was first. So you guys were maybe significantly helpful in getting the book into the eyes and hands of the judges, and I very much appreciate that. On the tarmac, fatigued, you guarded the electric fence which guarded the plains, which guarded the covert America, that guarded place. You coveted the steel fuselage, the ticking of the engine's prop, and longed to scrooch inside to know the gyroscope, push forward on the stick, bank, and feel the centrifugal pull as the ailerons tip, deflect, and lift you into pressured roll. Therefore the escalating sun, the takeoff into swipe of frigate birds, choppy course, your wind-brooded blue momentum, turn. The buzz, you could not say coordinates, your next approach that shifted from visual to instruments, was cordoned off. Evasive action. May day concede you to the crackling wire, those hoarse clearings, a pitch that seemed to thwart the air. I went to high school in the Central Valley of California, and my high school was located between a mobile home park and a cemetery that had a built-in crematorium. I always thought they could make a little money if they just put in a toll road. It was a great place to hang out, that cemetery. Hi. Crematorium at Sierra View Cemetery next to the high school. Impoverished graveyard, mangy green triangle where two freeways form a crotch. 20 yards from the gym and the ag shop. See, it's Morty's mom's funeral today. There's Morty in a tie, his dad's head rocking. The pendulum of a clock, tisk-tisks. Holes just the size of flower beds claim sleek boxes. Marry me, you ruined seed. All semester they open and gnash their yellowy teeth. There goes Mike, we say, his hearse lumbering through the iron gate. Remember? He used to drive so fast. And then that smokestack poking its head above the surrounding grass, so that others, ever mindful of space perhaps, could singe and shrivel on oven racks, blazing into eggshell-colored ash collected in old penny jars and in paper sacks. There goes Dusty, pointing at the belching puffs that tumbled over the valley. Between PE and molecular biology, the smoke you would sneak, half tobacco, half human, white alloy of the usual carcinogens, and Damon Pettibone's granny, or a bit of Mike, that chest that, before it caved against the steering wheel, felt strong and sinewy. I live in San Francisco, and anyone who's familiar with the city is familiar with Coit Tower. But maybe most of you don't know why Coit Tower is there. It was built as a tribute to the firemen who saved lives in the Great Fire that followed the 1906 earthquake. Coit Tower and us. Breeze up through the covert tiers and foliate terraces, a skewing of white jasmine stars, stammering bamboo. Sedulous, we ascend through the maze of concrete steps, conglomerate paths, and side yards scattered in terracotta. Collars turned against the evening news, telegraphing through weak-stemmed mallow and firethorn shrubs. We cleave the path as a form of music, long notes quavering low through our bodies the way the foghorn sings, repeats its mumbled history against the fluted tower. This stone column, the girth of a nozzle, monument to rescue. Interlude 1906. Fault line slippage and infirm topography. Havoc of granite balustrades. Beams that plunged earthward and plaster that lurched on cross walls. Tumbling brick and rock. Then the lick of flames against the sky. Soot-smudged faces and oily biceps carrying hoses or in bucket brigades as the poorly clad and scorched streamed down the peninsula. Some nights I feel that loss as if my own trembling musculature lies concealed under a rubbled city, listening to the mission bells. You pull me from this collapsed architecture, you too a kind of pillar. You almost have that same heft as we climb. I see you stronger, past all these houses that pebble the hill in a kind of cairn. And at the apex this marker, and from the marker a prospect. White sails dappling the gray waves beyond the swaying bridge. This is what the infinite feels like, you say. Take my tentative hand. One of the features of this book, one of the selling points, is that it has a gatefold poem. Originally, the gatefold was there to accommodate a poem that I wrote in CinemaScope, which is entitled CinemaScope. It's a very large poem, and I wanted the book to be able to accommodate it, so we had to add a page that would fold out. And my editor was a little bit reticent to make that change, to make that addition. But he said, if you write another poem that fits on the reverse side, we'll be more likely to do it. And I felt like I was being sort of, shoved into a corner and told that I would never get my way. Because I had no idea what another poem would look like that would fit on a centerfold. And so I thought, well, I'll just write a poem about the idea of centerfold. Into every life some possible lover should come. You don't quite catch his name the first time through. Call him Brian or Ryan. You met him at the antelope petting zoo or on the steps of City Hall at the yearly die-in. He was a body among so many other bodies, some furry and with horns, some able, some glistering in sweat, some you heaved upon like amphibious D-Day craft quitting the ocean, some unable to stand erect, their soft boy parts pressed against you, the way lunch meat feels when it falls from the sandwich onto your legs. All the untouchable figures outspread upon the asphalt, as if it's natural to recline this way, playing possum, flashing the word vacancy, glowing, snuff-colored against the motel background of a pornographic magazine carelessly tossed against the curb. Recognize one face among the 23 airbrushed faces, slightly withdrawn, obviously stoned, nimbused in a union of elapsing smoke and incandescence. Isn't he the one who looked upward into your gawp as if a deathbed held him against you? He was living then. You both were living, and the vessel protruded, your hull dragging up onto the beach, his carcass already a carcass on the sand. No, he was a darling critter, a feral thing, but he struck you, he bit you, and you broke inside, and the condom broke. Shoddy piece, princeling, posturer, dirty, dirty beast. Since this is election week, and we're always talking about what constitutes the ideology of America. During the time that I was writing this book, went back to the speech of John Winthrop, governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, who talked about America as a city upon a hill, a beacon to others. I like to think that at our best we achieve that ideal, but sometimes it seems that light flickers. City upon a hill. The shape of landmass deviates its former line. Chisel and saw the slope, redraw the boundary where sea meets shore. From the vantage out on the horizon, a land made close that we might navigate toward, the sheer incline of it, that we might cross that sea and raise a beacon upon that hill to those who came and after. Previous to flight, and piles driven into bedrock, and in no particular order, girders, gasoline, pipeline, the state, the last cold climate, liquefaction of the Arctic sheet. There was a city, beheld the waters, exceeding its port, and longed to traverse that profound body. Wide was the sea and far, embarks the city record. The wind and rack of pounding sea, the dense, unmoving sea. I think we just saw what the dense, unmoving sea does. Oh. Things will get better. One of the difficulties in writing this book, in putting it together, was that there were such often differing emotions that drove some of the poems, and I wanted to be able to find a model to reconcile those. And oftentimes, everything that you need as a writer is already contained in your psyche. You just have to access it. And I was I was reading the poems of the Latin poet Catullus, who has these very wide swings of emotion, anger and love and sadness, and often in regards to the same person. And I remembered years ago going to a city called Waxahachie, Texas, where for lack of public funding they have had to live with this courthouse that embodies that artistic turmoil, as the artist who decorated the stonework there acted out his emotional relationship with one of the favored daughters of the town. It takes its title from a form that is used in quilt making. If anyone saw the quilts from Gee's Bend, Alabama, that toured the country a few years ago, this was a form that was repeated often, and yet every time it was made new. And that's what art does, is takes existing forms and makes them new. Courthouse steps. To say no more of art than that it makes by its very distraction a mode of abiding. Accordingly, its variations, each type of thread and piecework named double engagement ring, log cabin, or broken dishes, all built on the same geometric figures, precise interception of angle and line. So too, each tale of love is rooted in that first tale, the poet descending to the underworld, finally granted his shade, who'll follow him only to disappear again. Perhaps one version has them reunite, affixed in their solo chromospheres the stars which, to the human eye, appear to overlap. Substanceless love, immune at last to gravity and time. In Texas, I might as well recount this as a story, there's a town with a courthouse built on concrete and twisted iron, edified in red granite, capitals and architrave of red sandstone. With point and punch, a carver broached the effigy of his muse. He rendered her attractive features down to the very blush. Of course, she spurned him. Of course, there was another to whom she turned. Love should not be written in stone, but written in water. I paraphrase the Latin of Catullus. The sculptor carried on not just the face of his beloved, but the face of her other lover, snaggle-toothed, wart-peppered, pudgy, them both made into ugly caricatures of themselves, as wanton as the carver perceived them, and as lewd. Well, craze and degenerate and crack, the portraits hold, though long since the participants have dwindled into dirt. Beautiful, unbeautiful, each with an aspect of exactness. Tread light upon this pedestal. Dream instead of a time before your love disfigured, a time withstanding even crass, wind-beaten time itself. I'm going to read two poems from a new manuscript that I'm working on, and then I'll close with a couple of final poems from Chronic. But I think one of the great gifts that I can give back to the Tufts family is to say that this award has allowed me the time and space to continue to write and to continue to produce as an artist. So this collection that I am working on now will come out in the spring of 2012 along with the paperback version of Chronic. And I've abandoned the one-word titles for the moment. This book, in fact, has two titles which I feel sort of work together in very different ways. The book is called Useless Landscape, or A Guide for Boys. They could be about the same thing. And I'm going to read two poems from the manuscript. The first one, this is I'm always trying different voicing techniques and different ideas. I wanted to write a poem from the most unempowered place that I could think of at the moment, and to give that some sense of power. So this poem is written from the point of view of a member of the high school marching band. And it's called A Little Less Kettle Drum, Please. The field commander, in his regal busby, tosses his corded mace into the air. He too excites the eye, just as the color guard, those shako hats and twirling sabers, trot out our choreographed tribute to something. The 100 Years' War? Boom shakalaka laka, boom shakalaka laka. I'm part of a fantail movement, stepping time in the eye of a peacock feather. Hear me up there in the bleachers. I may be the least of all the piccolos, but mine's the tune you'll whistle as you leave. Now have all the mosquito trucks come by to prepare the grounds, and now has the unnatural grass been freshly mowed and limed. The drum line has reviewed all day, wheeling a battery of timpani without a glitch. If you heard a chirping flycatcher out of place, that was not me. It was the reeds. For I save all my wind to expend up-tempo on Close Encounters of the Third Kind theme by the maestro, Mr. John Williams. We do a scramble pattern then. That's when I imagine I am to be struck by the first trombone, like a turgid wet wiener thumping my shower bum when coach averts his supervisory gaze, or abject under the walnut tree, he'll make me practice the overture to Tommy. A junior who slides through valves like that, who works the phrase with such aplomb, will surely be able to play me something from the great American songbook, be it Body and Soul or Jelly Jelly. Anything will do, except I can't get started with you. And just for the record, I'll have you know, I play on the football team too. I just don't play on all of them at once. This poem, I was invited this year, again, probably thanks to visibility from this award. I was invited to be the 220th Phi Beta Kappa poet for Harvard's annual commencement exercises, filling shoes that had been previously worn by Longfellow, Auden, Eliot, Sexton, Ginsberg, Santayana, a long list of very intimidating poets, many of whom had written poems especially for the occasion. And I thought it would be just absolute disaster to write a poem for the occasion and have it fail. But then I'm always, my hero was Evel Knievel. And he used to say, if I hit the side of the canyon instead of making it across, at least everyone will see the splat. The title comes from a film from the 1950s, back at the time that we were so worried about the Soviets that it seemed every movie, whether it was a romance or a sci-fi or a thriller, had at its core some sort of anxiety about nuclear proliferation. And I think the age of anxiety has stayed with us. So I wrote the poem in hopes of alleviating some anxiety. So the title was used slightly ironically. It's called Panic in the Year Zero. Bless the tourists in their Alcatraz Rocks parkas on the upper deck of a double-decker in any given February bluster. They could have sworn it would be warm here just because the cryometer says it isn't cold. Who the hell would look at a cryometer? People from Arctic places, I suppose. People who must have flown in over the map's flat face, who must have seen the latest developments, the delta's brackish mouth, windmills, waving white banderoles against the crisping brown hills. Spring looks a lot like summer, looks a lot like drought. What would anyone expect if they knew the way planarity invites the opportunist? Aren't the dispatches the same, reaching them in Chehalis, Waterloo, and Asbury Park, even if folks don't watch what passes now for news? I assume they go to cocktail parties, or they Twitter. They don't all have snug jammies and Ovaltine, though they seem to get snugger by the minute. What kind of help could they get if they could get help? Help them make this dull show seem like art? Help the supporting cast appear in the end, summoned from the cities of the plain, and appear to end and end again, as in a wide shot of the Battle of the Marne? Be tolerant of those you cannot seem to understand, and other such advice. It's the quiet part of the morning service while I'm writing this down. Thank God for the quiet part. And thank God for the one who held me to my wickedness, who asked me to revel in it, even though it cost us both a little dignity. It's easy for me to look back at what's destroyed. I knew it would be destroyed, like a wicked town. I never thought, that town is where the heart is. I simply thought, that town is where the town is. Usually someplace inhospitable and filled with handsome men, the kind who kill you with their handsomeness or their acute cordage. Hell is the most miraculous invention of love, no matter how the love turns out. Hell is the place from whence the music of longing, which accounts for most of what we call music, gets written. Yet I'm tired of this idea of hell, no matter how functional. Sure, I've had my petty doubts, like the extra pills I've stashed in my Ava Braun box, waiting for the bomb to hit Bakersfield, or some other place in the near distance. This plan only works if there's some kind of distance. The sign that it's time to pull up stakes, head for those durable hills with my pemmican, my porta-pot, my jerry cans. And yes, I too would have Ovaltine, though I guess it would be Ovaltine made with water instead of milk. Such would be the dark days, if we think the dark days really must come. But I have lived through perilous times, and I do not love them. I cannot pretend I'm smart about such things. I mean, look at the sloppy slough I've been. And you were there. And you. You've seen me rumple down the sidewalk like a moocher. Lord knows you've seen me hit the sidewalk on my keister. Scandalous, the tourists said, and flashed. And when the worst of the drama came, they clucked their tongues and threw their change. Something inside each one of us is cocked like the ear of a hound, and half the time we hunt, and half the time we rescue, because we're never really sure if the humans will beat us or feed us. And if we are our better selves, it's just a wonder. And if we're not, even in our legends, angels come. They try their best, but we're such shits. And it's not because we want to screw them. We screw everything. We're mankind, it's what we do. I've probably sullied a few white wings myself. That's not the problem. So much has passed between us, we're practically cousins. The problem is, we're so bent on an ending, we'll sunder the entire valley with conviction, with an invented coda of immunity. Nobody in this picture is granted immunity. If it were available, I'd have gotten it for myself. Enough with the apocalypse already. Think of all the history you've read. It started somewhere. It started at absolute zero, is what you thought, just because you couldn't know what came before. But imagine something did. So I'm going to close with the two poems that end the book. They are mirror versions of each other. The first was written when I was in a relationship that I thought would end, and I was even sure how it would end. I was sort of writing the ending of the relationship in the poem. And then the relationship didn't end, so I had to quickly do a second version. Both of them are true, I suppose. They are inspired by Virgil's Eclogues, a story about a young man named Corydon, who's in love with another young man named Alexis, who spurns his love. Shepherd Boy. Not the most salient image for contemporary readers, nor most available unless you're thinking Brokeback Mountain, a reference already escaping. I did love a Montana man, though no good shepherd, rather a caveman, came spelunking into that grotto I'd retreated to. What light he bore illumined such small space, physically, temporally. And did he have a grove of beech trees? No, no grove. But together we found an old-growth stand of redwood. We gouged each other's chests instead of wood, pledges that faded. He was not cruel, nor I unwitting, but what endures beyond any thicket. Example, he took me to the ocean to say farewell. I mean, me farewell to ocean, the ocean for that matter to me, us both fatigued, showing signs of wreckage. And that man I had loved stood back from the edge of things. He did not hold me. I expected not to be held. We all understood one another. Shepherd understudy, ocean, me. And did he go back to his fields and caves? Yes, but they were gone. Strip mining, lumber, defoliant, sterile streams. You knew that was coming. Weren't we taught some starched sermon? The pasture awaits us elsewhere. Back up a moment. The forest you mentioned, remember, instead of a grove. Untouched for the most part. Some human damage, but not ours. We left no mark, not there, in the midst of those great trees, not in the concentric rings that might have held us far past living. Instead, I put that man, like so many others, on paper. A tree already gone from sight, where once it had drawn the eyes upward, the crest of a mountain, crumpled thoughts, crumpled love. Shepherd boy, do you see the wild fennel bulbs I gathered for you? Alali berries, new-mown grass, the tender fruits of the coastal fig. I put them on paper too, so fragile, for nothing is ever going to last. And yet, we think that song outlasts us all. Wrecked devotion, the wept face of desire, a kind of savage caring that reseeds itself and grows in clusters. Oh, you who are young, consider how quickly the body deranges itself, how time, the cruel banker, forecloses us to snowdrifts white as God's own ribs. What else but to linger in the slight shade of those sapling branches, yearning for that vernal bow? For don't birds covet the seeds of the honey locust? And doesn't the yew have a nose for wet fillory and slender oats foraged in the meadow? Kit foxes crave the black-tailed hare. How this longing grabs me by the nape. Guess I figured to be done with desire if I could write it out, dispense with any evidence, the way one burns a pile of twigs and brush. What was his name? I'd ask myself. That guy with the sideburns and charming smile. The one I hoped that, as from a sip of hemlock, I'd expire with him on my tongue. Silly poet. Silly man. Thought I could master nature like a misguided preacher. As if banishing love is a fix. As if the stars go out at night when we shut our sleepy eyes. Thank you.